Key things really are the things that haven't changed, and this is largely down to the regulations. So there have been some aero changes over the winter, but also we have the homologation regulations where there's big chunks of the car that the teams are unable to change without spending 2 of their tokens. Now we can see that other teams have changed their gearbox, their nose. Mercedes has been very tight-lipped about what they have changed with their tokens. The suggestion was it was front suspension. Obviously we can't see that because the part of the suspension that would change was inside the nose, so who knows what's going on there. But what we do know is very much the structure of the car, the suspension, the brakes, the chassis, all largely unchanged. What they've been able to change is the engine and the aero bodywork. So that's really what we've kind of got to focus on. Before we kick off with that though, just a point I get quite a few people have asked is it doesn't appear that there is any change in wheelbase or the level of rake they're running. Obviously studio shots, particularly with the neon lights underneath, which are very unusual and very unsettling to see them shown off like that. I don't believe there's any big structural changes to the car like that. It's just not practical to do that within the regulations that we have this year, at least from what we can see so far. So the key things that we have changed, there's probably about 3 areas that I've noticed. The first one is the side pods and the engine cover. And this really has followed what Mercedes have been doing for a few years now, which is really sloping the bodywork down widthways and also creating a lot of downslope on the back of the side pods, all trying to create downwash, to create airflow to go down over the car towards the diffuser, and it's kind of caught by that Coke bottle funnel at the back and gets kept underneath, hits the diffuser, creates more downforce, and it's what everyone's doing in one way or another. Mercedes probably the most extreme that we've seen so far. It looks like they've probably rearranged the radiators inside the side pod slightly, perhaps even lifting the tail of the radiator at the back of the Mercedes up slightly to get a bit of undercut at the back there. Also with the slope of the engine cover, you can see a very distinct bulge on the engine cover now, and what I believe this is clearing the inlet plenum, which is the air inlet that sits above the engine that's fed by the turbocharger and the intercooler to feed air back, compressed air back into the engine. Mercedes have always had a very large, very bulky plenum setup, and we knew that they were making some changes in that area. There's lots of rumours over the winter as to exactly what they were doing, but saying that it was going to change there. Change in a way that I didn't expect. I was expecting them to put more cooling on the centre line. That's not the case. It looks like they've actually retained about the same level of cooling on the back of the car, but they've just slimmed the profile behind the roll hoop down as much as possible, and that's just exposed part of the plenum, so they have just put a little blister over there. No real impact, that blister, and being a bad effect downstream on the airflow, but having much less bodywork is theoretically always a good thing. There's some arguments either way if you look at the Renault, for example, or the Alpine as it will be later on today. So that's the big change. Smaller changes at the front brake ducts have changed quite substantially and in a way that we haven't seen with other teams. Lots of other teams have been trying to lift the front brake ducts up away from the lower wishbone and the steering arm in order to actually shape those suspension elements to work with the front wing, particularly the Scarborough if we look at that car. Mercedes have gone the opposite. They've made their front brake ducts much larger, and this isn't a brake related thing, this is an aerodynamic thing. So they capture airflow with these brake ducts and just pass it straight out through the wheel. A bit like we saw with the blown axles a few years ago. Mercedes seems to have taken this to a bit more of an extreme. I've had a look at the before and after on the wheels. The wheels are ever so slightly different this year, which does suggest that they're trying to create more outwash with the front brake ducts through the wheels. Totally legal. Everyone else is doing it to some extent. Mercedes seems to be pushing it much harder this year. A kind of one of those little small details. And then the other thing, which is the other question mark, is the engine. Now we knew that they had unreliability towards the end of last year, and this is related to the MG UK, which is effectively the old KERS motor, which is the 160 horsepower electric motor down at the side of the engine that gives the car the boost around the lap from the hybrid systems. And Mercedes said they've made some big changes in this area, very innovative. They're not saying what that is or how it's working, so it's related to the cooling and the packaging and the installation of the motor generator unit on the side of the engine. And whether we will ever find out what they've done there is debatable. We'll probably never get a chance to see a clear picture of it. Even if it is, it's probably all internal. But there's nothing we've seen today that suggests Mercedes aren't pushing any harder this year than they have done since 2014. and see what everyone else has done. I think it will be, you know, kind of business as usual. Yeah, there's always the chance that the changes that they've made, particularly with the power unit, could introduce some unreliability. Knowing Mercedes, that's unlikely, but we'll just have to see. But yeah, everything is looking good for an 8th title here.